super competitive. Carlos Monteverde on the front row, James Cottingham alongside. They will be desperate to be first into the Dunlop curves, and in behind the little Lotus with Roger Wills, I fancy he's thinking about having a crack.
So where is James Cottingham? He's not alongside Carlos Monteverde where he should be. He's alongside the DB4 GT of Tom Alexander, and Roger Wills in the Lotus is further back. So Tom Alexander, the white DB4 GT, out of position as we get ready to start. The Breadvan moves up, Project 212, that pale green Aston Martin. The rows are definitely not in 2x2 formation, but are they given the go anyway? Yes, they are. So it is Carlos Monteverde in the dark car, number 20, the Lister Jag Costin, that leads the charge to the first corner. The Lotus 11s go either side, or the 11 and the 15 go either side of the Breadvan. The DB4 GT Zagato is in second spot. 1960 car Tom Alexander making a good run up into the Dunlop chicane. Now the first dozen are through. There's only about another 75 cars to follow them before they sweep down into the S's.
Hold the shot, Martin, and we will just talk you through, but fantastic starts from the Lotuses. And I think that Tom Alexander DB4 was about 1 millimetre behind Cottingham on the start-finish line. Therefore, he was behind him. That must be his thinking, but Cottingham trying to fight his way back. Alexander into the lead of the race, will have run wide, and thank you very much. Row 1 goes back ahead of row 2.
Go hard, go early is Tom Alexander's motto here. Now, who's got the speed in the straight line? Again, the dark car number 20, Carlos Monteverde, side by side.
Cottingham sits so much lower, doesn't it?
Yeah.
You think them side by side in the paddock, they look as though they're the same size, but number 20 from pole position, Carlos Monteverde, now back in front, but I fancy 68 is going to get his nose up on the inside, and don't forget, no, he's not. Yeah. He's a bit further back. He's not so good on the brakes. They're approaching the first chicane, not bothering a great deal with braking, but he's got more weight to pair down there. Tom Alexander, tail a wagging on the DB4.
The tail wagging for 200 metres down towards the braking area. The braking areas are very long here. 68 in third place is Roger Wills in the Lotus, so we did not have James Cottingham on the front row of the grid. Don't know where Cottingham's car was. Haven't seen him take the start, so we'll have to look. Going to have to flick down to page 3 or 4 of the timing screen. One of us needs to watch the screen. Carlos Monteverde, the race leader, again under pressure from Roger Wills in a little light Lotus at the DB4 of Tom Alexander, looking to make it 3 wide under braking, but he has to get on the brakes earlier, Bruce. And look at the little marks he left there with a rear end lockup.
It's not braking, it's snaking.
Yeah. Oh, and Roger Wills on the lock stops as he chases the throttle in the Lotus 15, driving hard off the second chicane and around the kink on the Mulsanne. Project 212, that light green Aston Martin ahead of the Breadvan, and that is that red Ferrari with that distinctive double opening at the front and the big long aerodynamic rear end. And talking of long aero rear ends, that's what the Lister Jag has got. And Lister Costin in second place now behind Roger Wills, our race leader.
Very bold start from Roger Wills, putting his little Lotus up to the front, and I don't know for how many laps Tom Alexander's going to keep any heat in his tyres or any tyre life in his tyres. He's chasing so hard in that DB4 GT, which looks wholly out of place against these much, much smaller cars around him, but under braking, you see the Aston Martin going one way and another, but a much better poised, much lighter car is the Lotus 15, leading the race in the hands of Kiwi Roger Wills, such a historic racing aficionado. There are the top 6 cars, but then there's a huge gap back to 7th place. 7th place at the moment, I think, is the Nyblaeus Welch, number 23. We have appeared to have lost Cottingham from that front row. Yeah. You were absolutely spot on.
He didn't start on the front row. He didn't come round with Carlos Monteverde, who's under pressure again. Monteverde locking up twice under braking. And again, the Aston Martin. I mean, what a different kind of car it is from the Lister, which is a purpose-built Le Mans-style racer. And James Cottingham and Max Girardo's car has been shown as being in the pit lane, or not on the track at least. Vincent Gay in the number 10 car, the 250 GT Berlinetta. I'm not surprised that that didn't start, because I saw that coughing a big cloud of smoke out in practice yesterday. But there's some of the half-dozen cars that have a grid spot that weren't on the grid. So it looks as though the James Cottingham and Max Girardo car that should have been on the front row of the grid, the Jaguar, has not made it to the start of the race. And back here, well, we've talked about it in every grid so far, and we will do until we're sick of saying it ourselves. whatever position you are in, you have got to battle for it, and for the one in front and for the one behind. The Morgan there cutting the nose of the 61 car, almost contact as they went through Arnage.
And it was a classic situation, Martin, where one overtaking manoeuvre loses momentum for one of the drivers who could suddenly lose 2 or 3 places. Little TVR tucked in behind. But don't forget, it's not just about this race. Still got 38 and a bit minutes remaining. We've got 2 more races. There has to be an element of caution. You do not want to damage your car, because overall glory will only come at the end of the 3rd race tomorrow afternoon. Conditions absolutely fantastic here at Le Mans. The racing at the front. Sharp end, well, not good at all for Monteverde. He dropped from the lead of the race back to 2nd, back to 3rd towards the end of this lap, and he's limping in. Should be sharing his pole starting Lister Costin with Gary Pearson, but this way too early for a pit stop. So concern for Monteverde, and that means that Roger Wills is under less pressure as he pulls clear of Tom Alexander. It's, of course, a Lotus ahead of the much larger Aston Martin. But the number 20, Lister Costin, time to talk to the mechanic, but not to go racing. Number 6, Maserati Birdcage, starting to pick its way up the order. Lights ablaze, that's Fierro.
Yeah, Guillermo Fierro, who shares with Steve Hart in that 1960 Tipo 61 Maserati. Named the Birdcage because as you look inside that big plastic screen, you can see the lattice work of fine tubes that make up the tube frame chassis, multiply braced. Didn't take long for it to acquire that moniker, did it? Right in front, car number 1, and that is Stefan Wimez, Ludwig Caron in their Austin Healey 3000 Mark 1. Again, 1960 vintage.
Bottom end of the top 10, so fierce fighting, we know, right at the front of the top end.
Cars are the same age and totally different in any imaginable way. Austin Healey built in Warwick in initially limited numbers, based with Austin mechanicals from very humble saloons. The Maserati using a derivation of its then Formula 1 engine with the most exotic bodywork and chassis, you know, but again, handcrafted like the Austin Healeys were. The early Healeys were very much hand-built at Cape Works in Warwick.
What a great sight, though. Oh, there's Gary Pearson. He won't be taking over from Carlos Monteverde. So number 20 car being packed up. In fact, it almost looks like he was the one that started the race rather than Carlos.
I think he might have been, actually.
Ergo, that probably explains, because I wasn't too sure that Carlos would have had time, having done the previous race, to get across to the infield, to get the car to trickle round.
Although Carlos did do the first stint, we think, in the other race as well. But again, that's only what it said on the grid sheet. So
yeah, no, I was taking that into account. So we've got some Japanese racers here in all sorts of vehicles. Austin Healey's a particular favourite this year, but wonderful to see this Fierro's Maserati Birdcage, so tropical looking, but braking hard, but again, super nimble. Not exactly a car from a humble background, quite the reverse, but gaining more position. Certainly that started somewhere down about 15th on the grid, and going forward, which in racing terminology is a good thing.
Yeah, past another of the Austin Healeys. That's a 3000 Mark 1 it went by. Of course, the Austin Healey's not only successful in racing, but especially successful as factory rally cars. The number 6 car moving up the order. I think that was the number 23 Austin Healey that it was going by. It's a Nyblaeus Welch car. It replaces, that was a late replacement for a Sunbeam Alpine. And here is one of our 3 Corvette C1s. This car dates back to 1960. It was the one we had the onboard lap with earlier, the number 26 machine. So this is a replica of a car that would have raced in period. Tribute to the Briggs Cunningham run Corvette that raced here in 1960, driven by Edwin Stuckey and Ludwig Cholet.
Now, battle for the lead has closed right up because Tom Alexander, or the Alexander Willmott Aston Martin, has not just caught but gone past Roger Wills. Has Roger got a problem in the Lotus 15, but one white car swaps another? Could be more different in shape. One decided to take the corner on the track, and the other decided he would have a bit of the outfield as well. So the Aston Martin now into the lead of this race. Still just under 35 minutes remaining. Wonderful bridge over the circuit. It's not made of bricks. This was put up this year to celebrate 70 years of Porsche.
I'd love to know...
the back of the main grandstand, decked in the same decals as well.
I'd love to know the weight difference alone between the Aston and the Lotus that gives chase.
So a rich array of every shape and size of car imaginable in this special race for cars that competed at Le Mans from 1957 to 1961. This is the third of our 6 batches of cars that will have 3 races each at Le Mans in a 24-hour period. So a sight a lap for some and a serious, serious racing lap for everybody else. Nearly 80 cars started this race. Not 18, 80. Cars wherever you could look. Cars of every imaginable shape and size. And you don't see as many Corvette C1s. We have 3 of them in this race alone, and that is the beauty of the Le Mans Classic. Let's take a look at a little bit of a lap on board.
Well, this is riding on board live now with the car. This is the Chalet-driven car, which is just on the fringes of the top 20, out of Arnage, up to 3rd. So he never drops down into 1st, and into 4th gear. So just the 4 gears on the big Muncie Rock Crusher gearbox. Just allowing the revs to rise all the way through up to a maximum. It's going to be right around 8,000 RPM on the fastest parts of the circuit. Down into 3rd, leaning the car through into the Porsche curves. It's the first ever iteration of America's sports car. Still in 3rd, and he'll hold 3rd likely all the way through the Porsche curves.
And it's only right we should be riding with the Corvette. Corvettes have been such a part of the Le Mans history. I think it's 19 years in a row now we've had Corvette racing with their wonderful, largely yellow Corvettes. The C7 up to waved yellow flags up ahead of him, so he would have noticed and backed up. All the drivers have little warnings, or the clever ones have little warnings by their steering wheels to let know if there's a safety car period or a slow zone, what speed they have to drop down to. But really pressing on ahead of the little Porsche in behind, very different to the 718.
Yes, again, you know,
718 quite easy to break, the Corvette less so.
The balance of weight alone tells you everything you need to know about the difference between these 2 cars. The Corvette all about keeping the speed up as much as you can, and the Porsche about using your minimal weight to try and reel in the man in front.
Well, all sorts of people pulling off the circuit. The number 17 Porsche Spider to the side of the circuit. And we had double wave yellows at turn 33. Maybe it was because of this Lotus pulling to the
Lotus
side.
11, Lotus 15 rather, yeah, I think that might be the case actually.
Well, I hope so,
it was Lorinda de Silva that started, didn't you? So
yes, I'm not entirely sure that's the yellow zone cleared. Certainly they haven't removed it from the top of the screen. You can see the yellow flash next to the countdown towards the end of the race. But turn 33, that's getting towards the Porsche curves, and you tend to have accidents at the larger end of the scale if you're going off big gravel tracks. In fact, it's the exit of the latter stages of the Porsche sweeps, if you will.
Yeah.
So our race lead is out 2.5 seconds. It's the Alexander Willmott to Aston Martin DB4 ahead of the Roger Wills started Lotus number 68.
Now here's a battle to warm the heart of everybody in the Malvern Hills. If a 2-0 scoreline for England over Sweden was enough, a Morgan attacking a Ferrari 250 GT Berlinetta. Now again, both handcrafted in very limited numbers in small factories, but you can imagine that the Ferrari possibly is higher up on more people's shopping list than the Morgan. Pierre Fillon, the president of the ACO, the Automobile Club de l'Ouest, and himself a former keen racer, now a keen historic racer. He and his brother Francois sharing a car as well.
And in behind him is Karina Laumann, whose car is in the hands of her husband in second place in the race. James in the number 22 Lotus, and looks like Karina's very relaxed, so I suggest James will be running as long as he can, as deep into the pit stop window before he comes over for the driver change. And certainly Karina looking very relaxed and happy down there behind Pierre Fillon.
Now we've had new fast timing screening, absolutely mental. Either we've it's not sorting itself out. Looked like the leader had suddenly been pushed down to about 10th place, so a slight timing glitch. I'm not surprised in these conditions. One of the advantages of cars this age, actually, is that they tend to use distributors rather than electronic ECUs, which don't like heat like this. Distributors don't like it very much, but at least they keep working because they're mainly mechanical. ECUs tend not to at all. So it's again one of our Japanese teams we saw earlier on with the number 43 car, which is the Alfa Giulietta, and this is Tatsuka Koijima, who's driving this 1957 Alfa Giulietta SV.
And it has to be stressed, the Japanese love of racing is one thing, but their love of Le Mans is absolutely legendary. They've been taking serious cracks at it, and when Toyota finally broke its duck just 3 weeks ago. The jubilation in the pit lane, as well as the sheer relief from the Toyota management, was palpable. I then went to Japan the following week, and their excitement is still absolutely enormous. So for a lot of Japanese racers, they love racing at home, racing around Southeast Asia, but to come here and to race, they really get historic racing. To race here at Le Mans is very, very special indeed.
That Zagato-bodied Giulietta's, it's a derivation of the 105 series Alfa Giulietta's, 1300cc, twin cam, twin carburettor with that streamlined Zagato body. You've got a lightweight E-type, which the driver changes. This is not a driver change pit window open yet, so this is more a mechanical issue for the car. And that's car number 7, so that's Maurice Saurin and Gal Réjean and Pierre Bess in their 62 E-type.
Had a change of, well, fleetingly, we had a change of position for second place. It's a really good battle between James Wood in the number 22 Lotus and car number 21, Wolfgang Friedrichs, in the Project Aston Martin. So at the moment, oh, it's just changed again. Friedrichs, here he is, number 21. He is back it down into 4th, but the race is being led by an Aston Martin in the hands of Tom Alexander. The pit window is now open. Let's see how the changes unfold.
Project 212 Aston Martin disappears under the Dunlop Bridge in the battle for 4th place. For 3rd place, just behind, is the Ferrari Breadvan. They go by the number 52 Deutsche Bonnet with its Panhard twin-cylinder engine. And again, busy hands. We saw this car racing in the snow, Bruce, didn't we, at the members' meeting at Goodwood a few months ago, and that was busy hands for a very different reason. Here the grip is low, relatively low, because of the high speed, but also because of the high heat of the traffic, of the road in front.
The approach of Lukas in the Ferrari Breadvan has been very, very good news for James Wood, because it's taken the Project Aston Martin off his tail. Now the Project Aston Martin, Wolfgang Friedrichs, again, we mentioned Goodwood, he's had great success. His bonnet is just rising up very slightly. That will be a distraction for him, but now maybe that's why he's backed off a tiny little bit. Car's starting to come into the pits, and I think he'll be coming in very soon. But for Wolfgang Friedrichs, who has just dropped down to 5th place, he's handing over to himself. He's not one who's having a driver change, but he still has to have the pit stop.
Yeah, Lukas drives through inside the chicane into 4th place, so he moves back up to 4th. As you say, Little Lotus right in front, the number 22 car, just trying to escape. And here comes Lukas, sends it long and early down the inside. You see the glance in the mirrors from the Aston. Yeah, know you're coming, door was open, you got me fair and square. Manfred Freisinger, man who is very, very familiar with modern Porsches. It's the car he's bought and restored and is now racing himself. It was a late entry on the reserve list, but Manfred Freisinger qualified that car very firmly in the top 20. And just getting it a little bit crossed up and bounced over the curbs, shake of the head as he got himself back underway.
Well, we've just been enjoying looking at one Juliette, the one from Japan, but this SZ number 35, Jean Brandenburg and Lucien Charles Nicolet pushed behind the barriers. So not all the cars making it to the finish of this race. Hopefully they can be repaired to take part in races 2 and 3 for these batch re-entries. So for a lot of the drivers, now is the time they put on their balaclavas as late as possible. It is still very hot down in the pits. Cars starting to come in, little TVRs just flown in. Yes, oh, your balaclava was inside out. Let's change it round. There we are professional in this sport. But at the front end of the field, it's still the Alexander Willmott Aston Martin DB4 GT, 18 seconds clear of Roger Wills. Roger Wills running in the Little Lotus, not that Little Lotus.
Battle here, this is just on the fringe of the top 20, 20th and 21st place, the Morgan and the Lotus Elite. And in front of them, another Morgan, so another of the +4s. Now, we saw Morgans racing in the first group of cars as well. Those are flat rad pre-war Morgans. These have got the more rounded nose, which is still the current. I mean, you can buy a Morgan out of their factory in Malvern that looks exactly like that still today. It is no different. Still sliding pillar front suspension. It's only really slight detail changes and the variety of engines that they've used over the years. That Morgan +4, very much still a current car, as well as a what we're now, half-century-old historic racer.
Yeah, I must confess, as a child, I even thought they were sort of off period back then. But the fact, if you told me that 40 years later they would still be producing very much the same thing, albeit slightly improved. Good to see the yellow flag area at turn 33 has been cleared. And see the cars coming through the Porsche curves. The majority of them diving for the pits now, suddenly getting very busy. Cars at the back end of the field coming in, but those at the front end resisting it for now. But I think we may get our race leader coming in fairly soon. Tom Alexander going very well, but he'll be handing over to his good chum, long-standing race partner, Adrian Willmott. I'm sure they're very, very keen to see if they can take victory in this, the first of the 3 parts for the battery cars running between 1957 and 1961. In the top of the shot, you can just see the Aston Martin as the little Alfa Romeos come into the pit. Aston Martin going around one more time, just crossing the start-finish line now. Was 18 seconds clear. Now looks like it's going to be nearly 21 seconds over Roger Wills.
Well, this is one of 2 or 3 Zagato Alphas, and you saw the SVZ going by, the SV version of the Zagato. This is an SZ, so slightly less highly developed, but again still shares the 105 series platform. In comes the second place car. I wondered whether he'd come in now as well. Don't do the same as the leader. You're never going to catch them if you do that. In comes third, in comes fourth as well, in comes fifth. So second, third, fourth and fifth fly by our window. In has come the Lotus from second place. In has come the Breadvan Project 212 as well. So the leader remains out in the DB4, and that's an impressive job in the DB4, which is a big saloon car. Even in super lightweight mode, it's still a big old saloon car against purpose-built racing prototypes. That's an epically impressive drive. Driver change going on here.
That's Karina Lohman, just Laumann about to get in. James Wood hopping out. James trying to help out. Well, he better help out. It's his wife. Here, have a seat, my dear. And in it goes. But again, different size people, different sides. And it's about getting comfortable. You've got to hang on in these cars because around this circuit there is not just slow corners, but there are some corners where you get a lot of loading. So James Wood, ever the gentleman, hops in to help out Queenie. Oh dear, it's suddenly not a good moment for the Alfa Romeos. And this is the one that had a problem before. Yeah. Kojima.
So this is the SVZ, and we just saw him going by the pits, and unfortunately if he'd come in, maybe they would have been able to sort the problem. The Breadvan having a quick tyre pressure adjustment.
Lukas Halusa staying on board the Breadvan, often shares that with German racer Claudia Hurtgen, who goes very well over the years.
Or is he? Because he's shown as being down with Martin Halusa, so I'm not sure whether he stayed in or not. We've got no way of telling, unfortunately, unless we actually see the change. It didn't really look as though there was a driver door being shut, but then they may have done that already.
When in fact on the timing screens it only showed one name. It showed his Christian name. It didn't say Halusa. So
yes, that's very true.
We'll run that guess. But the story is really the fact that the lead Aston Martin has stayed out on the track for a further lap before making a pit stop. And Tom Alexander and Adrian Willmott have been racing that car for a very long time now. And in terms of the development to getting it right for historic racing, you think it's very much on point at the moment. Vast majority of the cars have now made their pit stops. It's really... in fact, up to second place by not making a pit stop is the number 6 car that we've seen driven so well. It's the Maserati Birdcage. Guillermo Fierro will be handing it over to Steve Hart.
This Corvette C1 started on row 22 of the grid, so it was 44th, or 43rd, because we're missing James Costin at the start, but on the 22nd row of the grid. Now moving itself up towards the top 20. Where has he got to so far? I lost him on the timing screen. Here's the Breadvan, here's Project 212. So
battle rejoined.
Yeah,
this is how they were before the pit stops, and they're very close to the tail of Roger Wills' car that's now in the hands of John Clark.
Yeah, but not that close. And the Aston Martin and the Ferrari, the Aston, again, they obviously weren't watching on the TV or can't briefly fix the problem with that leading edge of the Aston's bonnet. I would have thought a bit of gaffer tape at the very least across the front would have stopped the air getting in, because the potential for danger if it lifted off. The hinges are at the front, the little twist fasteners are in front of the windscreen at the rear that hold the rear down, so it tips forward, so it shouldn't fly off, but shouldn't and isn't going to. My classic car ownership tells me are not necessarily the same thing. Yes, Tim Roller nods in agreement. A man who has had more than his fair share of older car experience. Yeah, no, I wouldn't say loose bonnet. No. He's probably not been hit on the head by a loose bonnet that he forgot to fit, and I have.
Well, change of what will effectively be for second place, because suddenly the Project 212 Aston Martin and the Ferrari Breadvan have both deposed. It's David Clark, not John Clark, who's taken over from Roger Wills. Roger will be racing, of course, with the silver fern of New Zealand on the side of the helmet, the blue helmet there of David Clark, who will settle down now, try and get back past that Morgan, which is out of sync because of the pit stop sequence. He's got to try, if he wants to get to the podium, to stay with the red Ferrari Breadvan and the green Aston Martin Project car.
Right, now that Morgan, in fact, is out of position, but in the top 10. That's Keith Arles in the number 28 car. He's going very well indeed. He is currently 6th. But these guys, no, these guys on their out laps have already gone back by him. There you can see the little two-stroke Saab ring-dinging its way around the circuit. But, you know, here's the Aston Martin with its straight 6, the Ferrari, the bellowing V12, and a ring-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding-ding of a two-stroke motorcycle racer coming from a big bulbous Saab saloon. I mean, you just can't imagine anywhere else other than sports car racing where you just get that variety. Just remarkable.
Always the beauty of sports car racing. So let's just run through who is where in the race. Alexander and Willmott car has now come into the pits from the lead, and it should be Tom Alexander handing over to Adrian Willmott, waiting for the number 6 car, which was a minute and a bit back. But really, that isn't in the mix. The cars we're looking at now are in the mix, effectively 2nd and 3rd. The 21 Aston Martin Project car 212. Tucked in behind the Ferrari Breadvan, made specifically for racing with that wonderful chopped-off tail.
Long aerodynamic tail in the cam rear end to try and break the turbulence. You can see Wolfgang Friedrichs, he was one of the drivers with the shades on. Now, actually, as they're coming into Indianapolis and Arnage, I think the sun is low enough behind the trees that they've not got that problem. Of course, they haven't been racing these cars as you would have been in the classic race, in the 24-hour race, for sort of 5 or 6 hours already. They're not covered in bug splat, so it's a little easier to see. Lotus battle there for position. And our Corvette C1, or one of our 3 Corvette C1s, makes its pit stop. So the driver waving his gloves to try and cool his hands and his gloves down. Dry his gloves out, cool his hands down. I can imagine that with that, 350 horsepower furnace in front of him, that's not at all a cool car. Not in temperature terms, at any rate.
Yes, in every other term possible, it's a very, very cool car. So the number 6 Maserati Birdcage leads the race with Guillermo Fierro at board, but he owes us a pit stop. That will see him drop down to around the tail end of the top 10 and expect the Aston Martin, which has rejoined, Tom Alexander handed over to Adrian Willmott to go back into the lead of the race. Had a good advantage, but the race in itself is the race between the Ferrari Breadvan, number 16 Lukas and number 21 Wolfgang Friedrichs. The German, such an aficionado of the Aston Martin mark, and he's achieved some top results. But come 2nd or 3rd, it matters not too much to them. It's the fact they're having a cracking race. But Lukas, having got past, is now starting to stretch his legs. And can Wolfgang Friedrichs tuck in behind and stay with him? Or will the Ferrari Breadvan continue to stretch away? Let's see over the remaining 15 and a bit minutes in this race. But both of them, though, they've got to do one thing. If they want glory, they've got to hunt down and catch the race-leading DB4 GT. The battle for second place. The 16 Lukas Ferrari Breadvan has just passed Wolfgang Friedrichs' Project Aston Martin car. They're listed as 3rd and 4th positions, but the Maserati Birdcage that's leading the race, the number 6 car, has yet to make its pit stop. So effectively, this is the battle for 2nd and 3rd. But the car they're hoping they can catch, but they are some distance behind, 35 seconds. So it's just gone down to 31 seconds behind Adrian Willmott, who's taken over in the race-leading Aston Martin DB4 GT, the number 53 car that's had so many years of racing in the hands of Alexander Willmott, and that experience is really starting to show. Both quick drivers, but knowledge of the car, knowledge of the Le Mans circuit really do pay dividends.
Look at the Aston Martin pulling alongside the Ferrari. 2 very different looking cars, again purpose-made for their jobs. The Ferrari designed for the long, fast circuit here at Le Mans. The Aston Martin really much more at home somewhere perhaps like Goodwood, where it had some of its best racing successes, but continued development has turned the Project Aston into a potential race winner, which in periods it never quite got to that position. The number 2 Ferrari is in, And that's the Patrick Seaman, Isabel Legac and Clive Joy car.
Yeah, Clive was starting that car towards the front end of the grid, row number 5, but clearly a problem. But good to see the Aston Martin has not let the Ferrari Breadvan get away, has managed to get, as they go past the Sunbeam Tiger, Sunbeam Alpine, I beg your pardon, able to get under the tail and use the slipstream.
Yeah, Fillon about to take over from David Clark, the boss of Jota Sport, in their Lotus Elite. And Pierre Fillon, the president of the ACO, gets the seat cushion in and then pushes the seat back so he can do the belts up tight. David Clark looking very hot indeed. The Elite, a tiny car. Colin Chapman, a tiny man, 5'4", and so he designed cars for himself because that's how you did. You know, for you and I, Bruce, on the other end of the height scale, Jem Marsh, much more our sort of man, 6'5½". Now that's a car I can fit into. Lotus is less so.
Yes, I remember very much. I desperately wanted a Lotus Elan Sprint, and I tried to sit in one. I couldn't fit, so that's why Peter Wheeler, another tall man, TVR. That's why I have a TVR.
It's either double amputation or have a TVR or a Marcos. Here's the current race leader, Maserati Birdcage. Pit window is now closed. This is a major miscalculation by the team. He has not stopped. And that is throwing away a great chance of a great result. Now, Pierre Fillon leaves the pit lane, but he's already been in and made the stop with David Clark. So that change has taken place, and they have gone back out. But having not been in the number 6 car, well, frankly, might as well not bother because it's going to get the penalty now, whatever they do. I'm not quite sure where to go with that one. You just have to now... You've made your bed, you've got to line it, but Fierro has to bring that number 6 car in now. Pierre Fillon also racing here with his brother. So Francois Fillon will be sharing a car with Pierre Fillon in one of the other groups. How many times has the British former Prime Minister raced in historics? I'm not too sure any former British Prime Minister has. But yeah, the Fillon brothers both very, very enthusiastic. The Birdcage flies past our commentary booth into the pit lane, all too late.
Yes, the cuckoo has left the clock. So back into the lead of the race is the number 53 Aston Martin. Great to see that little well-balanced 55 car. It's also great to have someone who's ahead of the FIA out there racing. They've got to appreciate it, they've got to understand it, and unfortunately the clock was set to the wrong time there for the number 6 car. He's calling them across, but they're going to pass him. He wants the water and he wants it now.
Yeah, no,
unfortunately, it's probably a fury. I don't know if the message has got through to him yet that he's coming a lap too late. His concern right now is just getting a drink. I think it has.
I think it might have, yes. I think the gesticulation was part of...
Why didn't you call me in?
Yes, a barely controlled rage going on there, I think. Unfortunately, his poor wife seemed to be the one who's getting the brunt of it mostly. In fact, she was holding the bottle. However, that will leave the DB4 back in front. And of course, this is the first of 3 races today through the night time and then tomorrow. And the total time for all 3 races will be added together. But if the DB4 can win by 15, 20, 30, 42 seconds, doesn't matter, then you've got an advantage that you then carry through into the next one. Now,
I'd like a close-up, actually, the number 68 Lotus that started by Roger Wills, because I'm not convinced that Roger hasn't got out of it. I think he might have stayed on, because we've got David Clark down for 2 cars. We've just seen a David Clark handing over to Pierre Fillon. Don't worry, the Gunston Chevron is not going out into this race.
Not in this
might quite fancy it, but why start 33 minutes into the racing action?
Yeah, absolutely right. Now, what is this that's just come by the Corvettes here? Well, I don't recognise that at all. We're watching the Stucky and Cholly Corvette at C1, which is not going at great speed. That has got an issue. I would suggest in this heat that might have a misfire.
Well, that would come as no surprise. It
doesn't sound too bad. Now, here's our race leader. So here's the DB4, and behind is a DB-engined Deutsche Bonnet.
Well, you know what?
The
gap between first and second, it was 18 seconds or so. It's down to 8 seconds, and I'm beginning to wonder if indeed it was actually Adrian Willmott, who's the quicker of the duo who started this race, or Tom Alexander. But Tom wears a black helmet. The driver at the start of the race, driving to Aston Martin, was wearing a black helmet. So it could still be Tom Alexander doing the whole deal, and maybe Adrian Willmott would do all of the night race tonight. in that DB4 GT. But the Ferraris in the background, there's a little Porsche in between them. The blue Porsche will be passed very easily indeed, but what was 18 seconds fell to 8 seconds. It's now down to 6.9, the Lotus interval. Thank you very much, said Lukas, polite to the end. He's still got the Aston Martin project car keeping him company, but all along they can see suddenly that white Aston Martin that went off into the distance coming their way.
Well, polite is part of it, but also sticking a gloved hand out into the airstream, even for a couple of seconds, helps to bring the core temperature down because it cools your wrist. And we've seen drivers doing that in prototypes, in modern prototypes, to try and cool themselves down in really hot races, sticking the hand out of a window or out into the airstream. Here's our Alpha SZ, the 1300 Giulietta Zagato. So this Carisi Papo car in 47th position. Up to 46 now, in fact, because their closest rivals just dropped down one spot, having pitted late, or gone into the pit lane at any rate. It's now stopped about halfway through the race, down into the final 8 minutes, and leaders are lapping at just a fraction over 5 minutes, so we'll get 2 more laps from the race leaders. Probably not. Depends how far round the Aston is now. Actually, we might just squeak onto a third.
Yeah, it should almost be coming into view down through the Porsche curves, but the gaps come down to 5.3 seconds between first and second, about 0.053 of a second between second and third, between the Ferrari Breadvan and the Project Aston Martin. And every TV director's dream, what was a stretched-out lead battle is now far from it. They're all going to be together, perhaps even as early as the Dunlop curve at the start of the next lap.
And that's a very good point, actually, because the speed that they're catching down towards Indianapolis on that run, you can see that the Ferrari and the Aston, actually, do you know what? They might even be all over the back of him before they get to the chicanes. I think by the time they get to the Porsche curves, they're going to be looking for a way past. Whether they can find one or not, that's going to be an entirely different question, because that is a very, very tough part of the circuit to pass. Now he's coming up, the Aston, behind the Saab 93, and that is going to be going very, oh, they got straight by, very much more slowly and on the other side of the road, so that's not an issue.
Well, lights ablaze from the race leader. I'm still questioning the drop of pace. I think maybe it was Adrian Willmott who started the race, Tom Alexander who's taken over. It certainly was a very feisty first half of the race for the Aston Martin DB4 GT.
Oh, and a change of lead already into the Porsche curves. Through has gone the Ferrari. The Breadvan goes right by the Aston Martin. I wonder whether the Aston Martin has dropped a cylinder or something. We're not hearing it so strongly from the camera microphones. Let's send Jim outside to see if the Aston sounds like it's running as cleanly as maybe it ought, because when they come past us, it'll pick up out of the chicane, and he should be able to hear. But here's our new race leader, Bruce. Well, when we came halfway through the race to the pit stops, you'd never have guessed that happening.
No, not without a problem of some sort, but the driver on board, whether it's Tom Alexander or Adrian Willmott, nursing a car that is losing pace, very tidily and kindly stayed out of the way, so he's fallen back behind another type of Aston Martin, the Project DP212, coming through the green car now into second place. The Aston Martin that was sitting pretty with a 20-second lead after the pit stops is now back into third position. Yeah,
that DB4 has got an engine problem. The way he came off the corner there, acceleration out of the chicane.
Jim said it sounds fine.
Okay. Well, he's definitely. He lost ground under braking, but he lost a lot of ground under acceleration as well. And Bruce, you and I can accelerate out of the Ford chicane in a straight line.
On a good day.
Yeah, I'm not sure that car is quite producing what it ought to. It might be running cleanly, or running on all cylinders, but it might not be quite the car that it was at the beginning of the race. And again, anybody who's had an old car, when it starts to get hot, that's when the power goes away.
Well, the driver who likes to cool his hands by sticking them out of those sliding side windows, the panel windows on the Breadvan, Lukas, he was competitive from the start when they had the dummy start, if you will, when they ran over to their cars. He was the quickest driver sprinting. It meant nothing. They began to regroup on the back straight. But Lukas is very much a competitor. He's had that fantastic battle with Wolfgang Friedrich in the Project Aston Martin, has got past it, is now going away, and the other Aston Martin, the DB4 GT, disappearing only now, coming over the crest of the rise on the first part of the Mulsanne straight.
Well, what was the lead? You know, he had an 8-second lead. He must now be at least 10 seconds behind the Breadvan, so he's dropped 15 seconds minimum, I would have thought, on that lap, maybe more. So the Aston Martin and the Ferrari, they have been door handle to door handle. Both have had the advantage at one stage or other in the race, but as the race has drawn on, perhaps the Ferrari is just making better use of its tyres. We saw a tyre pressure adjustment in the stops. There may well have been one for the Aston Martin as well, because the pressures you set early in the race definitely aren't going to be the ones you want late in the race with a lighter fuel load and hot tyres on a hot track.
Well,
Aston is still very much in contention. It is the Ferrari, though, that leads this race.
the thing that will change the outcome of this race is Wolfgang Friedrich is doing all he can in the Project Aston Martin to keep the race honest. Is going to be a gaggle of back markers that could sort it, but look, the gap has gone out to about 5 seconds between first and second, dropping off the background. The answer to your question, it was a whiff. And the answer to your question, Martin, sorry, just examining the timing screens, it was a whisker under 17 seconds that was lost by the erstwhile race-leading Aston Martin, number 53, Alexander Willmott car, but Lukas driving solo in the number 16 car. Now we see the problem for number 6, the Guillermo Fierro, a 1-lap penalty for missing the pit window. He came in a lap too late, which is a shame. He's running around in 5th place at the moment, but he should have sort of been there on merit without that, because he didn't gain any advantage. He just transgressed the rules, and that has cost him dear, particularly when we're aggregating across 3 races.
Yes, and that's the unfortunate part, you know, whether he missed the signal, whether the team told him or didn't tell him, we're not sure. I'm sure they're aware. Just saw the side window blow out of the Breadvan, by the way. But yes, it's compromised their entire weekend. Now, here's the problem. The Morgan and the Porsche are right in the way. Blue flags being waved. But the Breadvan goes straight up the inside, so that little bit of plexiglass that was alongside him flew out on the run down to Indianapolis. But, luckily, blew away over the side of the track. And the Project 212 Aston still in 2nd place. This looks very much like it'll be our 1-2, but we have got 1 more lap to go. And if Le Mans has taught us anything in the 24 hours, Bruce, over the last 3 years, it's with 1 more lap to go, with 1 more minute to go, with 1 more corner to go, you don't call it.
Absolutely so, and there have been cars that pulled off just a minute before the end of the race. The team didn't tell them back even as far back as the 1960s, and it's even more unforgivable now just simply because of all the accurate timing equipment that is available to all the top teams, all the teams per se. But Lukas has driven such a good race. He had the better of the traffic there. Certainly Wolfgang Friedrichs lost out on the run between Indianapolis and Arnage, a gaggle of 3 cars dispensed with before they got to Indianapolis by this man, the driver of the number 16 Ferrari Breadvan, a car made to go racing, made to be more aerodynamic than its rivals and erstwhile stable mates. But really, in many ways, it's had as great a career, if not a greater career, in historic racing than it ever did in period.
And I think possibly it's only because it's so unique and quite successful that people sort of accept it. You can see some of the styling cues of the 250 GTO that it's sort of loosely based on. But really, let's be honest, you know, the Ferrari Breadvan looks only a mother could love. I mean, just, you know, God love it. It's very fast and very competitive. I'm sure it's an absolute whale to be inside, whale in terms of fun, but it ain't a pretty, it ain't a looker.
I quite like it.
Well, I quite like it, but only because it's so defiantly not a beautiful, crafted object like a 250 GTO is. I mean, you can see the, you know, the side vents, you can see the nostrils and all of that stuff. And again, with that plexiglass cover over all those carburetors, shades of the 2416 Formula 1 car as well. So all of those Ferrari styling cues that were hovering around the late 50s, early 60s are all in there. But then they sort of drove her under a low bridge or something and just stretched the back of the car out like that. You know.
Change for 3rd place because Alexander Willmott car. Further changes because Alexander Willmott car has gone back to 3rd. The Aston Martin that was 2nd has just had a spin at the Dunlop curve. So that means Roger Wills and David Clark are up into 2nd place. Here's a replay of Ooh La La and a little bit more.
So there's Wolfgang Friedrichs. Watch for the White Lotus to come through as he starts to rejoin. Oh, just missed it. The White Lotus shot by just as he was starting to rejoin, and through following it went the white Aston Martin. So you're absolutely right. Dropped down to 4th place now, Wolfgang Friedrichs.
It's possible he could get back to 3rd. This is the final lap of the race, but the DB4 GT is lapping about 15 seconds or so off the pace of the front 3. The front 1, of course, is the number 16 Ferrari, Lukas Hugenholtz 24 seconds clear of the Wills Clark Lotus that's giving chase.
In fact, the DB4 is the third slowest car in the top 20 at the moment. And it was the fastest car in the top 79 at the beginning of the race. So there is definitely a major drop. Well, here's the car that's now moved up. I was going to say inherited, but grabbed second place by the scruff of the neck because they
close up, because I think that's Roger Wills.
That is Roger Wills. Yeah.
I thought the helmet had changed from black to blue, or sort of gunmetal. So, like quite a few of these drivers, they haven't used their second driver in this race. And David Clark, as we commented, was actually doing the first leg before handing over the Lotus Elite to Pierre Fillon. So.
And do you know what? He got out looking so second-hand. I'm entirely sure that there was never the plan in this heat to put him straight back in the car, but to leave Roger in there because he's got cooling airflow, you know, among other things. A little bit of cloud building up in the sky, and that'll help bring a bit of humidity to the evening. Yellow flags being waved there as the leader is on the last lap of the race. There's second, there is third, the white Aston, and the green Aston is fourth. So the Lotus in second, the Aston Martin in third, and Project 212 in fourth place. Second, third and fourth.
But the Project 212 car, as long as it's not spun again by Wolfgang Friedrichs. Oh, there's the
Saab, yeah.
93, 3 is the number of wheels it still has on board. That unfortunately gobbles up some of the opportunity for the Project car to close in on the DB4 GT, but Roger Wills has got the DB4 GT very close behind indeed. He'll wait for the exit of that yellow period, and then he's got to go.
Now, of course, what's happened there is it's not a code 60 or a code 80. They could close right up. They just couldn't overtake. So they are now nose to tail to tail to nose to tail to nose to tail to tail.
Quite close together at the same time. But Roger Wills has done so much historic racing. He's used to a huge amount of pressure, but the 212 could pass both of them before we've even got as far as Indianapolis. Going past the Alexander-driven car, and it looks like he's going to... No, he's not going to be close.
Yeah, he is. No, he squeezes through into the kink, into Indianapolis, through the run down to Indianapolis. But he's had the pace in that car that the DB4 had earlier on and doesn't seem to have anymore. And Roger Wills, second place. But like I said, you know, now we don't even call it until the fat lady has taken her second bow and her curtain calls and has sat down for a glass of sherry afterwards. So this is still a battle for the podium between three cars, of whom possibly only two can end up on the podium, because out front, still the Ferrari Breadvan, half a minute away from this battle. But Roger Wills, you just saw having a long, hard look at that high mirror on top of the plexiglass in front of him to see where the Aston was and if Friedrichs was coming. The answer is, yes, he was coming. He wasn't quite close enough to make that pass.
Yeah, but the punch that Project Aston Martin had out of Arnage means he'll have much more momentum as they get up through these very fast sweepers as they approach the Porsche curves. His nose is up the inside. They've got to go around another kink beforehand. He wants to be come up alongside the Lotus when they get to the Porsche curves, but Roger Wills keeps on attacking again. The low sun in the face of Wolfgang Friedrichs. Our race leader, Lukas Hugenholtz, 33 seconds clear. He's only got the final few corners to do. He just passed pit in. He's got the forward chicanes to follow, all under control. Great drive from him, but which car is going to burst into our view next out of the Porsche curves? 2 by 2 they come. Some back markers just getting out of the way. So here is our race winner, Lukas Hugenholtz. We've got enough time to call him across the finish line as the winner of the first race for batch number 3, and then we can turn our attention to who is coming next to finish second.
Yeah, we've got 30 seconds before they get to the line. So Lukas Hugenholtz claims victory in the Ferrari Breadvan. Lights coming towards us, which means that the car in front of the lights does not have lights on. It's the Lotus. And the Project 212, 4.2 litres of Aston, didn't catch 2 litres of Lotus. And Roger Wills drifts the car out of the final corner to grab second place. The Project 212 Aston in third for Wolfgang Friedrichs, and the Alexander and Willmott DB4 GT that led comfortably the first half of the race and showed great pace and huge racing verve ends up in fourth position.
What a lot of racing action, what a lot of manufacturer variety, and it will still go on, and a driver who will be kicking himself from here to the paddock and back crosses the line in sixth place. That's Guillermo Fierro. He's come across the line behind Hugo.
But ahead of him in fifth position is the Lister Costin of David Hart and Hans Hugenholtz, and that car was a car that raced here in period in 1959 with Peter Blond from Great Britain and the USA's Walt Hankson. So an ex-Le Mans competing car didn't end up finishing the race, didn't finish the race, but an ex-Le Mans Lister Costin with its Jaguar engine. David Hart, long time contemporary GT racer and historic racer, and Hans Hugenholtz, son of John Hugenholtz, the man who designed Zandvoort among other circuits. And the leaders are across the line, Bruce, but there's another 4 or 5 minutes of manic arms out, elbows out, devil take the hindermost, racing for every single position. 2 Lotus Elites, a Ferrari 550, Porsche 550 Spider, a Morgan +4, there's the Sunbeam Tiger Le Mans behind it. Car that's so spectacularly sideways at Goodwood at every opportunity.
Sounds like we had a late spinner down at Arnage as well. After that quintet of cars went through, everyone a different shape, with the exception of the 2 that are the same shape, rather Murray Walkerish, but the 2 Lotus Elites at the back of that pack.
TVR Grand Tourer there, battling with a Morgan +4. As they head off into, literally in towards the sunset, actually. But looks like the Porsche came out on top of that little pile. That's, in fact, it's a 718.
Yeah, Peter Vögele's had a really good little race, and that's going to come home just outside the top 10, about 13th or 14th position. So it shows not all the racing was at the front, but there was plenty at the front, which kept us entertained until Lukas pulled clear in the Ferrari Breadvan. But some really enjoyable action. And for the photographers, the light is starting to become very interesting. So here are the race results. Victory for Lukas in the Ferrari Breadvan by a whisker under half a minute, but the battle behind wasn't settled until that final sprint to the line, with Roger Wills driving solo in his Lotus 15, beating Wolfgang Friedrichs, who was fighting back. He'd been second going onto the final lap, had the spin and actually dropped down to 4th place, but eventually managed to get up to 3rd, challenge for 2nd ahead of the Tom Alexander-driven Aston Martin DB4 GT. Some fantastic GT racing all the way down this absolutely massive field of cars, entertaining everybody out around the circuit, and hopefully you too watching on LeMansClassic.com.